This is a riser I just cut out for a recurve. You see the profile I drew on there with Sharpie, and I cut it out on a bandsaw, large bandsaw, right here. And I leave about 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch on the outside of the lines. And then I'll take it down the rest of the way on this sander to bring it right to the line and get it perfect and smooth. And all the while, be very careful to stay true to this side, square to it, because this has to be square to this side. Everything has to be square to at least one side. Keep everything on the same plane, or perpendicular to the same plane. When I get close to the line, it's a process of putting it on the mold and keep checking for perfect fit. Okay, I have a good light behind us, and you see that gap? That's no good. So just go along. I mark the gaps, mark the areas that are touching, go over to the sander, remove them, come back, double check until I get it right. Matching profiles on a sander like this is a pretty simple task for a bow maker. But if you're new at this, I remember the frustration of first trying to do it. You take it to the mold, and each time you sand more, you're further and further off from where you want to be. So if you're getting in that position, just find your patience, or stop and put it aside. Work on it again the next day. Just be confident that you'll eventually get it right. Working on this sander, it's all about feel. You know, you get to push on it. You give a certain amount of pressure to get the radius right. If I know I have to take a little more off the end, I'm going to push harder on the end. If I know I have to square it up, I'm going to push harder on top or bottom. When you get used to this, working with all these different kind of woods, this is Bacote here. It's pretty hard, but all these different exotic woods have varying degrees of hardness. They sand, some of them are really hard to sand, some of them sand fairly easy. That is all going to change how much pressure you put on it, the amount of time you're going to put on a sander before you go back and check again. This is all stuff to get used to in time, but in the beginning it would be a little bit frustrated trying to match the profile of the bowl mold just perfectly, so this mates it just right and you don't have any light shining in between. And then, like I said, you always want to check for squareness. You also want to pull this thing out and give it the feel test to make sure it's completely smooth. There's no little bumps in there, anything like that. You can't have anything like that because it's going to show up in the glass of the bow, or it'll have bubbles or something because it's not hitting the mold just right. Air bubbles between glass that you can see. So that's why it has to be perfect. It has to be perfectly square so there's no twists in the bows. Just take your time and be patient with it. Okay, I'm ready for the glue up. I just take the table and cover it completely with white butcher paper right before I start. Keep the dust down and to make sure everything's really clean surface. And then I lay out all my parts the same order they'll be going, same direction, everything. So all I have to do is glue each piece and move it to on top of each other. I start out with the back of the bow glass facing down. I put it on 2 layers of cellophane, and then when I get everything glued together, I put 2 layers of cellophane on top of that, and I wrap the whole thing with cellophane just to keep glue and everything off my mold to try and keep it contained. As far as the preparation for all this, I showed you a little bit about making a riser. That's obviously the biggest part of the preparation. Anything else is picking out your lambs. There's a lot to that. You know, that's just personal opinion and matching grains and all that stuff. But as far as preparing your lambs, I always like to give them a good or quick sanding with like 60 grit on the big sander, just to flatten the side that's going to be seen, because they're pretty rough the way you get them. They're ground with maybe 24 grit or something. That's how they're made, so they're kind of rough for a finished product, so I like to give them a little sand beforehand. Just try to not do too much because it could affect the weight of the bow in the end. So just enough to where it smooths it up and it makes the grain pop a little more. You know, some of these lambs, if they're sitting around for a couple years, some of these woods change colors some when they're exposed to oxygen. So it's good idea to sand them a little bit and freshen them up before laminating them into a bow. Then you gotta clean the fiberglass really good, hold it up to the sun, see if there's any specks, the dust and all that in there, and get that clean. Then I'll take everything to the compressor, blow it all off, and then wipe everything down with alcohol right before the glue, just to get fingerprints and everything off of it. And that's where I'm at now. It's all wiped off, all laid out. Should be all dust free. And now I'll put on the rubber gloves. You know, that'll be, I won't touch it anymore except for with rubber gloves. And I'm getting ready to mix up epoxy and then and glue it all together. Now my epoxy, I just keep it simple. I just use a paper plate, 2 throwaway plastic knives, one for the one for the hardener, so we don't get it mixed together. And then I just take a small piece of wood, like a small piece of lamb, and that's what I use to spread the epoxy on. And we just go both sides, you know, everything gets epoxy. So the glass, and then, you know, the wood is going to touch the glass, down on the glass, the other side of the wood, the riser, everything gets a really thin layer of epoxy. You don't want to put a whole lot on there. And then wrap it all together. And then I put these metal strips on here. Sheet metal strips that are cut to 1 3/4 inch. Those go on the back and belly of the bow, right outside the cellophane, you know, on the glass. And then I package tape everything together at 4 spots. You know, each side of the riser by the fade outs, and then down by the tips. That'll keep it all together. So then when we pressurize it in the mold, it doesn't want to walk on you and spread out and all that. Now, as far as these metal strips go, I always clean these up a little bit each time before I use them. So I'll put them on a sander for a few seconds, and just to make sure I get all the tape off from last time, any kind of globs of glue that might be on there, anything like that that ends up inside, even on the outside of this metal. If you have like a glob of epoxy or something like that, it'll actually show up. It'll dent the bow when you put pressure on it. So you have to be careful about that. Also with the tape, you want to keep the tape to a minimum, maybe 2 wraps on there, because if you go taping it a lot, the thickness of the tape could also dent the bow. It could show up in the finish. So you have to be careful with that. I put have my mold ready over there. It's just off to the side, because once I get everything ready, I'll put it in the mold and then squeeze it down. I put that rubber strip on the mold just to kind of limit things, like I said, impressions into the finish of the bow. So to give it a little bit of give, a little bit of margin of error. Okay, we're all glued up and ready for the oven. Once I get it all together, I tighten these bolts as tight as I can get them. I like to smash the hose down as flat as can be, because the hose is radiused, so we want it flat as possible to take most of the radius out of it. So I have it all snug down. I also shove like strips of this rubber in at the radiuses, anywhere where the hose is folded or doesn't look like it's hitting quite right, just to tighten up behind the hose. So I stick pieces of rubber between the hose and the mold, just to push up against the hose to fill in those gaps, to make sure everything's up tight when I pressurize it. So now I'm ready to take it over to the compressor. I'll put 95 pounds of pressure in the hose, and then it'll go in the oven for 180 degrees for 4 hours. Okay, so we have a rough shape of a recurve here, straight out of the oven. And That's what it looks like when it comes out of the mold. Okay, so far we made the riser, picked the lambs, did the glue up. I probably should have went into more in depth on making the riser. That's a very important part of this. Um, as far as keeping things true, you know, this side and these sides, they have to be perfectly perpendicular to one geometrical plane. And for more in-depth instruction on how to do that, you could watch my how to make a recurve mold video, because I show that process better on that one. I do it by using a piece of thick glass and straightening it out, and then putting it on the glass and making sure everything's perpendicular on all sides to that piece of glass. And you don't want to skip that step, because that'll put a twist in your bow. It's very important. Okay, then also I mentioned about taping the bow so the lambs don't walk on you as you pressurize it. I think I said tape it in 4 spots. Tape it in, don't be afraid to tape it in more spots than that. Tape it in as many spots as you feel comfortable so the thing won't move on you, because it does want to walk on you. Like this one, for instance, I ended up taping it at the tips, in the center of the limb, at the 2 fade outs, and then also right in the center. I like to tape it right in the center first, because when you go trying to tape up at the fade outs, as you could imagine, when you squeeze this side, the riser is going to want to slide that way, because remember, it's all slippery with glue in it and stuff. So I like to tape it in the center first to keep that in line, and then center of limbs to keep that in line. You want to be careful that everything stays on the same center line. You mark out the center line on your riser. Keep it on the center line of your mold. I have a center line on my mold. And then make sure the splice in your lambs stays on center. Make sure that riser doesn't move, because it can possibly slide from one side to another, or your lambs slide, and your riser won't be centered on where you want to center your bow. So this is just stuff to look out for. And then once you pressurize it, you know, you make sure your mold, everything stays square in your mold, nothing walks on you before you put it in the oven. Like that mold, for instance, that's the new mold I just made, so it's the first time I used it. I use different kind of angle or L brackets on that I haven't used before. So when I pressurized it, it walked a little bit. So I had to make up some clamps to keep it square and square everything out before I put it in the oven, you know, which is fine. You just have to make sure everything's good. Make sure that cellophane doesn't suck into any of the lambs. You know, you just want to give it one last look, you know, as you clamp it in the mold, and then after you pressurize it with the hose, with the fire hose, by putting 95 pounds of pressure in the fire hose, then you want to make sure nothing walks on you, because it's an incredible amount of pressure, and weird things can happen. So, and then okay, so then when I bust it out of the mold, the first thing I do is take all the painter's tape. Remember, I had painter's tape over top of the glass, because it's clear glass and I want glue and everything all over it. First thing I do is take the painter's tape off and do an inspection, make sure everything's cool, because you know, sometimes you pull it out of mold, there'll be air bubbles in there. Sometimes a lamb could crack under pressure, or fiberglass could split. You know, I've had it all happen. So I do a visual inspection to make sure that I'm not wasting my time to go any further with it, you know, because some of the stuff happens in a bow, it's junk and it's just garbage. You hate to go through all the trouble and then, you know, shape it and everything and find out in the end. So I'll take the tape off, and then I grind the sides down. Okay, so this edge and this edge will have kind of glue globbed up on it. So I'll take that on my sander, and I'll just kind of chamfer the edge to knock that glue off. So you'll see in the next part, again, I'm going to get it perpendicular to the glass table to establish a center line. So I need to be able to put a square up against this glass. So anything that's protruding out further than the finished glass has to be knocked off. so it's not in the way of actually holding the square up to the glass and being able to check it for light and stuff like that. So I knocked that corner off the whole way, the whole length, all the way down, both sides. And then I'm gonna put tape back on it, okay? I'm gonna painter's tape the whole face of it again, and then I'll walk you through the process of establishing a center line and the layout to actually cut out the profile of the bow. Okay, this is how I'm establishing a center line. So I have my glass table, made sure it's straight with a straight edge, shim it if necessary. And then now I'm trying to get the back of the bow fiberglass perpendicular to the table. Okay, so remember, I clamp it down with this clamp, but remember that bottom section may have glue on it. It's not necessarily a true surface. So I shim it with this shim until it's square. Okay, perfectly square. So as you could imagine, when you're drawing this center line, if this face is tipped, that center's not going to be a true center. It's going to wave, you know, it'll be a little higher in the middle of the radius and it'll be pointing down at the end or something. So you want to make sure that you're perpendicular to, you know, the glass flat surface. And then it's a good time to double check a couple spots on the bow. You know, make sure that that you're square everywhere, perpendicular to the glass table. Okay. Okay, no light shining through. Now this is a true test, because if there's any twist in your bow, it'll show up. You know, especially at these ends. You'll be seeing some light through there. If you have a twist in your bow, something happened. Either your mold's not perfect, or there's been some sort of imperfection in your glue up. And you can try and bump it out, meaning jam it in something and try and twist it out, but it may come back. You know, the bow just may be twisted. That's why you want to avoid that kind of stuff. You want to take all precautions to keep this thing square, keep all the energy of the bow going forward, not fighting itself with some kind of twist. Okay, now that we're square and everything's true, now I want to use this compass and go about center line of the bow. Doesn't have to be perfectly center, but about center, so you know, so the bow would actually lay out in there without going off the edge of the glass. And then I just want to transpose the glass table as a straight line to my mold. As you can see, I already did it. And you just follow that radius all the way around, all the way down there, okay? And that is how you establish a straight line on a curved bow. Okay, and laying out the limb profile, I use a metal template made out of sheet metal that I made. Obviously, you have to be very careful if you're going to make a template for recurve limbs. Being very careful in a number of different ways of checking, make sure everything's right and even and everything. But once you have one, you could use it as a template, or you could lay it out however to your liking. But this is what I like to use. It's not just a straight taper like a longbow or a flat bow. If you see, it runs parallel for a while, and then it tapers more dramatically towards the tip. So I have a series of center marks throughout this. Obviously, starting with the end, I have some holes drilled in it to reference. See, I made that with a red pen, the center mark in there, just to make sure it stays on center, because it will bend on you and you could force it from one side to another. So you want to have a couple of points of reference to keep it on a center mark. And then basically I'll trace it with a red pen or something that's easy to see. Okay, and then let's see my layout. Okay, tough to see because it's right on the edges of the glass. And there it is, and I'll follow that when I cut it out with the bandsaw, and I'll follow that when I get it right to profile on the sander when I shape it. I'll do the other limb the same way. This is going to be a 58-inch recurve, so I've measured along the curve to that line there. That's actually 30 inches. So 58 inches would be from knock to knock, which means that it would be 29 inches from my center mark to the knock, and I've added an inch past the knock to be to the tip of the bow. Okay, with both limbs laid out, now it's just a matter of laying out the shelf cut. Okay, so the shelf, the way I do it is, here's the center line of the bow, and I put the shelf 2 inches above center line. Okay, and then I measure up 4 inches to this point, and then I cut the shelf window from 4 inches above the shelf to, I cut it to center, so it's a center cut shelf. So I cut a rough cut of the profile here. I followed my line, and I've cut it out on the bandsaw. Now, if you can see the line, just like the riser, I've stayed back about 1/8 to 1/16 off my layout line. So I just rough cut it with the bandsaw, and then I'll put it on this sander and I'll sand it to the line to get it perfect on a sander. The bandsaw just removes the material. I don't do any precision work on the bandsaw. I also cut out, if you could see, I've 45 the corners and just remove some material to make it less material to remove with the sander. Sander takes a little more time to remove the material than the bandsaw, so I want to do as much as I can with the bandsaw as a time saver, so I'm not, spending all day on a sander. Now, the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to shape this handle. I'm going to shape the handle on the bandsaw on this radius of the, on the sander, on the radius of the sander. I'm going to start shaping for this handle. Okay, this is a left-handed bow. I made it for myself since this is my first time using this mold to make the prototype for myself. I'll use it for a long time before I ever think about offering it to the public. So I shoot left-handed. This is a left-handed bow for me. Okay, I make all my handles basically the same design. Okay, now it's custom, so if you call me up and say you want this or that, I can accommodate you. But my signature design of the handles is I go with the longbow style handle, even though it's a recurve, a low risk grip, okay, like this, as opposed to most recurves have a high risk grip with that big deep pivot point. Okay, I don't do that. I do a low risk grip like a recurve, like a longbow, even on my recurves, but I do contoured handle on my longbows and my recurves. I like a contoured handle as opposed to a hill style handle where just have that dished out even or flat on the back. I like the contoured handle because I feel like it could add to consistency of grip. So it gives you that feel to where your hand can engage with it and go to the same spot every time. I like that as opposed to like finger grips, finger grooves in the handle. I don't really care for that because that dictates the position of your hand too much. That means that you're taking out your own style out of it, okay? If you had finger grooves in there, that means that your hand has to go right there, okay? I want to direct your hand to the same spot, but I want you to be your own person too, and I want your hand to be able to go where it wants to for your style, okay? So it's a kind of a compromise between the two, but that's what I think is best, and that's what I do. Within those limits, I could make it large, small, a little bit deeper pivot point, less pivot point, whatever you want. But it's always going to be close to my style because that's my signature style. And people that order bows from me, they want that style. If you're looking for a deep pivot point, if you're looking for a flat back hill style bow, then you're going to find somebody else that is more within your style. People that come to me, they like my style. And my grips will be within my style, but customized to you. I'm going to start shaping this grip out. I'm going to use the radius of the sander, and what I'm going to be conscious of is keeping this top profile, okay, so the contour of the grip to where my thumb and my top finger are close to the shelf of the bow, because I like to have it to where my grip is as close as possible to the shelf of the bow. I want that arrow basically right above my fingers, okay? That gives you the best pointability with your bow to where you want to shoot for instinctive shooting. So that's what I like to do. So I'm going to be conscious about keeping this radius tight to the top, and the first thing I'm going to do is get it all worked out to get it close to the shelf, and then I'm going to work out the rest of the radius. So I'll give you a little demonstration of how this works. Okay, so you see how I'm working that contour for the top of your hand? Okay, that's the first thing I'm going to try to get right. So I have a good start to the palm swell and the grip profile. Okay, so like I said, it's all about feel, personal preference. But I keep gripping it and see. Okay, shelf's at the top of my hands. That's good. Feels right. Nothing's hitting me wrong as far as bump outs or anything like that. If it is, I'll work on that area. I work this back, the bottom of the palm swell, and then cross the palm swell to knock it down a little bit. Deeper if I want the palm swell out a little bit. It's something that comes with feel and experience on a sander. But just work with it, get what you want. You know, it's a custom thing and it's a personal preference. So you get a nice feeling grip and you feel confident about it. Well, that's what you go with. Okay, after I'm pretty happy with the contour handle, like the way it fits, next I move on to profiling the limbs. Profiling limbs, I have the outside trace of the limbs with the pen on there that I'm going to meet with the sander. So I'm going to be looking at following the outside line on both sides, looking to make sure that I'm into the good wood, not the edge of the glue and all that. And I'm looking for about 1.5 inches thickness on my limbs, because that's what's going to work out to the weight that I intend for this bow. However, the most important thing is staying true to the center line. So that's why I left the blue tape on there, so I have the center line still. So when I profile on the sander, I have to stay even the whole way down. So no matter where I measure, when I measure, I don't know if you can see it, but when I measure each side of the center line, and it has to be even on each side of the center, otherwise I'll have to take some off this side, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm still about a 16th to a 32nd too big on this side, and so I'm going to remove this side so it matches this side, and then that center line will stay the true center of the bow all the way through the tip. I have it right on the tip, but at certain places around here, one side is still bigger than the other. So I'll keep at it until I'm perfectly even with the center line. And that's the most important thing, even if you have to compromise the 1.5 inch width that you're after. You know, if it's a 16th less or more, you could tiller it out to the weight you need later. But
the most important thing is staying true to the center line. Okay, so remember at this point we're sanding fiberglass. So it sands pretty tough. It's tough on your sandpaper. So I have an old sandpaper that I use for fiberglass. When I'm sanding wood, I take this off, use it for wood, and then put this back on for fiberglass. So with all that time I had it on there and a decent amount of pressure I had on it, I probably removed that, I doubt even a 64th of an inch. So I'll do it about that much, and then I'll remeasure it, and then put it back on there, remeasure it in multiple spots to see if I'm too wide up here, but I'm getting right down here, then I have to put some more pressure up there. Okay, if it's reverse, then I'll put pressure wherever I need to take more off to make sure that my limbs are parallel, you know, running along that center line, and everything is even. Okay, we got the bow profiled out pretty well. Got the handle pretty good, pretty happy with it. The limb profile is good, parallel, tapered right. My next step now is, you see all this wood on the sides here, the flat sides, all that excess wood. I want to remove it and make it as slim, and I don't want any unnecessary wood on the bow. So I want to take that down, get it a nice even contour so everything flows together, even all this out, and just basically removing a lot of material. And the way I like to do it is with a pneumatic grinder. So I have a pneumatic grinder that has like 24 or 36 grit sandpaper on it. So just take it and run it down the edge of the bow and get the profile all tapered right. And I'll work at it by hand. Obviously with the 24 grit sandpaper, I'm not looking for perfection. Just getting it roughly shaped, and then I'll finish off the rest of it with wood rasp and sandpaper. But the key is the better I can do with the grinder, the less handwork I have to do later, and a big time saver. However, you don't want to go too far and ruin the bow. Okay, I've gone as far as I want to go with the grinder here. So as you see, I just slimmed down the bow, I profiled it. All this is radius now. There's no flat edges. I'm careful to keep the line of the fiberglass balanced so it fades evenly. Now this I'll work out with the rasp by hand to get it to fade evenly, to have same amount of wood on each side swelling out. All this has to flow perfectly for the bow to look right. As you can see right now, I have to remove a little more material from here to match that side, but that's all what I'm trying to do there, is get it, like I said, as close as possible with the grinder. The grinder's a really rough tool. It's what's necessary to get all that material off without spending days doing it. But it really, it's really hard to get things perfect with it. The grinder step is also the time to get your shelf pretty well set. Your arrow shelf, you want to get a nice radius on it here. You want to get it to cut in as good as possible. You have to do the rest of that with the rat's tail type of rasp. And you want to radius this portion to the arrow cutout window. What you're doing here, radius and all this, is just trying to minimize arrow contact with the bow. So I like to have it so it's just sitting on a center of the radius here, and it's just touching the bow on the center of the radius here.
Anytime after the bow is roughly shaped out, you can cut the notches in and string it up and see what your weight is and see what your tiller's like and all that. Okay, I'll mark both sides at 1 inch from the tip. Draw a straight line just to make sure that they're even from one another. And then for a recurve, I'll go a little bit more than 45 degrees. And that's going off the back of the limb. Okay, so I want to give it a little bit more angle, which meaning a little bit closer to parallel. Now the more reflex that's in a bow, the more angle I'll cut the notch at. So on a recurve, you want to go closer to parallel with the limb, whereas if this was like a straight long bow, I would want to go closer to perpendicular to the limb. Now from here, I'm going to try to match this angle for all 4 notches. So I'll flip it over, match the angle from my line up front, and make an eyeball line across the back, and adjust it from there. Okay, and I would lay out the other side just the same, and cut into it by hand. And I just make it small at first, and keep working at it, make sure it's even. Then when I go ahead and string it, I'll be able to tell, you know, if it's even or not, and work it from there. At this point, this is all I'm really looking for. Does not have to be perfect. I'm gonna get it pretty even, as good as I can. The layout's there. Remember, we're gonna glue tips onto this bow still, so those notch holes are gonna get full of glue. I like them to be there. I like to string it up first before I do that, see where I'm at. And I like it for a layout for when the wood's on there, there's a lot more to file through. So it's easier to get a nice layout while you're not, you know, while you're going through a thin profile like this rather than with the wood tips on there. I'll do that to all 4 notches. And I'm ready to string it up, see what kind of weight it is. Okay, we got a strung bow. This is a moment of truth here, because we're going to put it on a scale and see what it weighs. Normally, this would be something really important because I'd be filling a custom order. But today, this is just a prototype bow for myself, trying out the new molds, so not real critical what it weighs. I was shooting for 60. I currently shoot a 55-pound bow, and I thought if I'm going to mess around with this bow a little bit, maybe I'll go another 5 pounds heavier or so, and see how I like that, or make it seem simpler to shoot my 55-pound bow. Good exercise. But let's see what it weighs. Have my arrow here set at 28 inches. You guys will laugh at how short my draw really is, because how far I have to go past my face to get to 28 inches. So when I say 60, I mean 60 at 28, which means I'm not pulling anywhere near 60. Okay, well hey, that's about what I'm after there. Maybe even a little bit heavy. No, that's pretty good. So we're at 63 pounds. So if I want a 60-pound bow, I want to be a little bit over 60, because remember, we haven't rounded off the limbs or anything yet. You can take a few pounds or a couple pounds off of it when I round out the limbs. Right now, the limbs are untouched, okay? They're sharp edges, straight from that big sander when I parallel them. You obviously can't leave them like this, because you get a splinter just about touching it with this fiberglass. So I do have to round off the limbs, and that takes a little bit of strength out of the bow. So we'll probably be down to 60, somewhere around 60 in the end. And then if I wanted less, I could, you know, round it out a little more, make it a little skinnier, make the limbs a little skinnier, and get it down. You know, within reason, you can get a custom bow right where you want it, as long as you're a few pounds heavy to start out with.
Okay, we get into the handwork now after the pneumatic grinder. We're looking at trying to get these lines straight, even, any kind of bumps and flat spots out of them. We want a nice even flow from where it's skinny at the handle to where it's at its widest at the fade outs. Okay? So we have 4 sides of that. You know, here, 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 and here. And we want an aesthetically pleasing, even flow that will nice sweep out to the full width of the bow. So to do that, I just use like a rough wood rasp, and it's just, again, it's just an eyeball thing. Just sit down, you know, and just work it with the rasp. Take a look at it, see where I need to take some more out. When I start getting it even, I'll make sure I do full length strokes. That's how you get everything straight. It's one of those things that's gonna, if you haven't done it before, it'll test your patience. You just have to stick it out, and you have to stay confident that you will eventually get it perfect, and eventually you will.
Making the tips is another example of just matching the radius. Okay, so a small block of wood, and you want to match it against a good light source, and keep working at it until the radius matches the limb just right.
Okay, so for the tip glue up, once you have your radiuses just right, matched to the radius of the limb, and you don't see any light between, you shape the front side of it. I'll do that fade out right there, see, so it fades to nothing. I'll get that just right, and then the rest of it is oversized, and that'll be shaped with the bow all as one piece after it comes out of the oven. So the glue up is not that important as far as the alignment of it, since the outside of it's larger anyways. The only thing I'm really concerned about is getting this edge perpendicular to the limb. So that fade out, I won't mess with that too much after I pull it out of the oven. So I want that to be pretty good. I want the fade out to match in right. I want it to be perpendicular to the limb, and I'll wipe the excess glue off of that. So both sides, very good. And then I'm using the same smooth on epoxy as I used to glue the bow up originally. And this time around, I'll put it in the oven for 4 hours again, but at 140 degrees rather than 180 I did to glue up the main bow.
Okay, yeah, I want to show you a little bit about tillering. We've been following a build of the other bow, the Cody riser bow, but I had set this up and tillered it and then forgot to record it. So I'm building this one simultaneously, so I'll show you on this one. So I've marked the center line along the string, and that's the center mark of the bow, which I measured from measuring along from the notch down, finding the center. And then I measured out each way 10 inches, which puts me roughly at the fade outs. And I want to measure the difference between the top limb and the bottom limb, and it just tells how much bend is in each limb. And you want a little bit more bend in the top limb. It's a personal preference, but right now I'm just going to go an 1/8 inch positive tiller. That's pretty standard, and it's basically the thickness of the string. So if you can see, I line the tape measure up and try to keep it just parallel to the string, and when the tape measure hits the side of that line there, I see that I'm about it's 7 5/8 to the front of the string, maybe a little into the string. Then I come to the top of the bow and do the same thing, and I see that I'm about 7 3/4 to the front of the string. So that's what I'm looking for, 1/8 inch more bend in the top limb than the bottom limb. And that's just to even things out, because as you can see, the shelf is 2 inches over the center of the bow. So, and then where I'm going to be pulling from the string is going to be behind the shelf, so I'm not really pulling the center of the bow. So that's the reason why you want the top limb to be a little bit weaker. So then when you first set this up and you measure it, it's not going to be what you want unless you get lucky. So the way that you get it to where you want it is you basically go to the sander and you make this top limb a little bit skinnier. Remember, staying true to your center line. So you're going to sand a little bit off this side, sand a little bit off that side. Staying true to the center line. If you've taken the tape off of it already, I'll do a countdown and I'll try and keep even pressure. I'll put pressure on this side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Switch it, put pressure on that side, count to 5 again, and then test it. Depending on the hardness of the bow material and the limbs and the thickness of the fiberglass, depends on how long you have to keep it on there and how much you're actually looking to take off. If you're looking at an 1/8 inch negative tiller, when you measure it out, then you have to take off that 1/8 plus another 1/8, so you have to take off quite a bit. But just do a little bit at a time and keep measuring and keep stringing it out, measuring it, and eventually.
Okay, we are ready for finish now. We have a finished product here. And it's sanded down, everything's smooth. Everything flows at the right angles. Smooth transitions from handle to fade out. Everything's even. I can run my hand down and I don't feel any bumps or anything like that. Everything's completely smooth. So any kind of dips or anything in it will certainly show in the finish. So you have to make sure that everything's just right. I've shaped it. I've sanded it from hand sanding it from 50 grit sandpaper to get the shape down, and then going in increments from 50 to 60 to 80 to 100 to 120 all the way down to 220. The only thing I can say about that is if you've done any kind of woodworking, you know that you never leave the heavy grit to go to a lower grit until everything is shaped just right. So if I start out at 50, I want to get the bow perfect at 50, okay? And then everything from 50 on down to 220 is just getting out the scratches. From 50, I'm taking out the scratches with the 60. With the 80, I'm taking out the scratches from the 60. With the 100, I'm taking out the scratches from the 80. Okay, so all your shaping is done with the heaviest grit sandpaper to start with. You never want to do your shaping, any kind of shaping, with 120, 220, anything like that. It's only going to get harder. If you think you're going to, okay, I'm going to advance from 50 before it's shaped just right, you're just making it hard on yourself. It's always going to be easier to shape everything with 50 than it is going to be with 60 or 80 or so on. So make sure that the bow is shaped and everything is perfect at 50 grit sandpaper before you make that step. Okay, we're all done spray and finish. All right. So all we have left now is the leather grip, to put the leather grip on it. So I have 2 pieces to it. This piece cut for a shelf, and a rectangle cut to wrap around a grip. I actually glue it on with this contact adhesive.
Well, I have a piece of imitation sinew about 24 inches long and 2 pretty good sized needles. Make sure everything comes together straight and even. Okay, and then back through twice on the bottom as well. Now let's do a couple box knots that tighten up behind the leather so they can't be seen. Actually, one's enough, and then I'll just twist this together and stick it back up inside there. Okay, and there we go.
That's it. Finished product. Hope this video helped out anyone who was interested in the process and maybe thinking about doing it yourself. I think I covered every aspect of it with a little bit of explanation. Thanks for watching, and any questions you can comment on, and anyone that has any suggestions can comment also. I mean, to be honest, I've never really researched how anyone else builds bows or does this kind of stuff. I've never even so much as read a book on it. I grew up with my father making bows, and he taught me how to do it. I've been watching him since I was a young boy, and all his methods are my methods. So when he explained it to me, I grew up watching him, so it just made perfect sense to me, and I've never questioned it or never, even looked at how anyone else does it. I just figured this is the best way, and it all makes sense to me, and it works out great. So hope it works out for you.